And so it was with the story of Job, right? The narrator established as a fact of the story that Job is perfectly righteous. That's in the narrator's voice in the prose introduction. He states it explicitly. He bolsters this statement by attributing the same assertion to God. And the narrator also establishes as a fact of the story that Job is afflicted with horrendous suffering that he didn't deserve. It's not a punishment for sin. And then he leaves the characters to struggle with the implications. Job's friends cling to the idea that God rewards and God punishes, and so anyone who suffers must have sinned. We as readers know that they are wrong because of the narrative facts established at the beginning of the story. Job takes the other route. He knows, as we do, that he is innocent, that he is not being punished for sin, and therefore he concludes that God doesn't punish and reward at all, and that's a radical idea. That God punishes the wicked and rewards the good in this life, even if a little delayed sometimes, is a fundamental idea in much of the Bible that we have studied so far. It's going to get weaker in some of the books we'll be looking at. But Job denies this idea, and in doing so he arrives at a radical moral conclusion. The truly righteous man is righteous for its own sake, even if his righteousness brings him nothing but suffering and pain in this life or in any other. And remember that at the end of the book, the narrator has God state that Job is the one who has spoken rightly and not his friends. So be sure to consider point of view in your interpretation. You wouldn't want to go in and just lift something out of Bildad's mouth and say, this is what the Bible thinks, right? Taking a verse right out of context that way. Don't assume that every character in the Bible is reliable. Look to the surrounding framework as you evaluate their deeds and their actions and their speech and their views. And finally, don't be surprised if after carefully looking at all of those things, a passage remains ambiguous. Now, there is debate among scholars over the date of the book of Job, as well as some of the other books of the Ketuvim. The Ketuvim is the Hebrew word that simply means writings, and it's the label or the name that we use to refer now to the third section of the Bible, right? So we've talked about Torah, Nevi'im or prophets, and now we're moving into the writings, or we have already really moved into the writings, the third section of the Bible. Most scholars would concur that many of these books contain older material, right? But that the books reach their final form, their final written form, only later, in the post-exilic period. Now, if these books contain material that predates the exile, is it legitimate for us to speak of them and study them as a response to the national calamities, particularly the destruction and defeat and exile, 587 and 586? In answer to this question, we'll consider a relatively recent approach to the study of the Bible. It's an approach known as canonical criticism.